So we are ready for a new season of Stormcast in the General's Handbook 2025-26. There's a lot of changes, and I thought I would release a video talking about these changes and how it affects Stormcast in particular, and what I think are the good things to go for in Stormcast in this new GHB. So let's get into it and see what the changes are. So we had a lot of changes. So we have arrived in the GHB 2025-2026, and people had a bit of a swing in it to see what works, what doesn't work. There's a lot of changes, and a lot of changes that also affect Stormcast in particular. So as my main army, I am very curious to discuss what is the impact of these changes for Stormcast. So let's get into it. Let's see what my thoughts are on this new season and how Stormcast will benefit the most. So changes are mostly the tactics. So the battle tactics are gone, and instead we have missions that we have to play out over the entire course of the game. So this is quite different. It removes the pressure to fulfill a battle tactic each round, and it also removes the pressure of starting with your battle tactics in the first round of the game already. So it gives you a bit more option to set up the game, and then afterwards only go for the tactics, I would say. Otherwise, we have the Scourge of Ghyran scrolls, which are actually quite impactful for a lot of the armies. There are some armies where it doesn't really matter too much, but there's a lot of them where they're actually quite significant. Removal of the honor guards, because that was a rule of the previous GHB. We have a lot of obscuring on the table, which certainly has an impact. We have wire missions with the objectives being spread out a bit more. And obviously the point costs have been changed. So let's see, for these tactics, my approach for these tactics at least. So we score 50 points on the objectives, and we have 30 points on tactic cards. And the tactics get progressively more challenging. So the first one is like kill a hero for raffle cycles, I think. And then the second one is a bit more difficult. Third one is really difficult generally. If you score the third one, generally it means that you've already been doing quite well at the game. So it's more of an amplifier of your win rather than it turning the battle around. So with this information, you have 50 points on the objectives, 30 on the tactics. You know that quite likely your opponent is not going to score the last two ones of each card, so it's effectively 20 points on tactics unless you lose anyway. So that basically means that if you score the objectives routinely, then you will quite likely get ahead, because you will score probably at least two of your tactics. So for Stormcast, this means that, well, there's a couple of tactics you can choose. I don't like raffle cycles because you have to become the underdog at some point, and that is in the control of your opponent. I don't like Attune to Ghyran because you have to go into the center of the table and your opponent can counterplay to that. And I don't like the one where you start by killing a hero, because if there's matchups where this is incredibly difficult. Like a one-drop Archaeon list just denies that tactic very well. So, and Scouting Force is out of the window for Stormcast just because you don't have any units on the table at the start of the game. So for me, Intercept and Recover are going to be the most promising tactics to go for. And then this will routinely score you. Well, at least some points. And then if your game is going well, then you will also be able to score all of the points on these tactics. So that it's really a force multiplier in that way. But I feel like it's the best for Stormcast. So then in terms of Scourge of Ghyran content, I would say that these are the most impactful changes. So the Cities of Sigmar with Sinestra is now quite big. Mostly because of the teleport prayer to Sinestra herself, that also sets up units not even with any restrictions of how far they have to be away from enemy units, I believe. So you can just reliably make your cavaliers charge suddenly, even if they're stuck in combat. even despite the skill of the auto rule of 3 or 4 plus. To make them charging, you can just do the prayer and get a charge on a 3 again. And there's a lot of flexibility in this. So this is something to consider and something to build up for in your list. Otherwise, we have Daughters of Cain's Kratuza that got quite buffed with the Priest 2 and also the extra ritual points in the enemy turn, and the combination of a Cauldron of Blood where basically her own prayer goes off on a 2 plus, and the prayer that she has turns off commands for the enemy and does some other stuff that is quite impactful actually. So that's one to look out for. However, that's only one unit that can get basically a combat buff. We have the Skaven Bell that does some interesting stuff for extra movement and a -1 to hit bubble. So -1 to hit is not that impactful for Stormcast because we already hit quite well, and we can still. All-out attack has been nerfed as well. So I think all-out attack is also a big one for Stormcast actually. So we won't use all-out attack at all anymore, I think, just because of the -1 save. Because this scales really badly. Like, you can use all-out defense, then you go to a 2-up save with Stormcast. If instead you go for all-out attack, you go to a 4-up save. So that's a very significant difference. Meaning that if your opponent has no rend, basically you take triple the damage on a 4-up save. So yeah, the Skaven Bell is something to consider, but maybe not that much for Stormcast. Then we have the Seraphon Carnosaur, which absolutely wrecks anything he eats, and with the 4-up save and the Ethereal save, also for Stormcast, it is a difficult piece to remove with 16 health and the healing that it also has. It's not trivial to remove it from the game. So that is maybe a problem for Stormcast. Fire Slayers Magma Dross, they've become a thing. So they used to be not doing well enough basically, and now they're quite a thing. Black Coaches from Nighthaunt with the 3-6 charge, and also the the damage profile of the Black Coaches also has been boosted quite a lot. And then Catacross with healing. So there's a update in the battle formations, I think, for OBR where Catacross gets healing, and we have Places of Power now that can heal on a 3 plus. So the very tanky Catacross can heal now a bit better, and that might be a problem. So it's mostly that you don't reach the damage output anymore in Stormcast, possibly to be able to kill Catacross, unless you focus on damage quite heavily. Another change is the disappearance of Honor Guard, which I am very excited about, because Honor Guard did not really give Stormcast very much. So the only example where it did boost your army a lot was with Karazai. I don't have Karazai, so I don't care. So Karazai with Praetors gave -2 attacks, which was really impactful. Otherwise, I don't think Stormcast benefited that much. So I used the -1 attack with Reclusions, and I used Field Sergeant as well. So Field Sergeant gave some mobility, but I mean the impact was not that great, I would say. So the important units could always redeploy as well. So no Honor Guard is actually quite big for Stormcast, because there's no +1 rend anymore for the opponent. So where you used to see rend 2, rend 3 units routinely, you now see these units go back to rend 1 or rend 2. Rend 1 is very survivable for Stormcast. Rend 2 becomes the tipping point, and rend 3 is not good anymore, I feel. So it's really good that this is gone for Stormcast. So this is going to be a good season for Stormcast based on this. Also, no -1 attack, no decreases in our damage output. So a lot of our units, the Redeemers, they have 2 attacks, so they halve their damage output with Honor Guard, and a lot of the elite units even just have 3 attacks on the profiles, split over different models. So you would still only get 2/3 of your damage output, which is crippling, especially against units that are already quite tanky, like Catacross, for example. So this does compensate the extra healing that Catacross has now. So I don't know if we do still get over the tipping point to be able to just remove him in one turn. That might be exciting, but we'll see how this season develops. And also we know +1 to hit and to wound for stats that are 4+, 4+ or worse. This is, I think that was the most popular choice for these armies, where you do go around the 4+ to hit mostly. So this is, yeah, it's a buff to Stormcast that this is no longer there, because it makes the other units worse. So then, in terms of what to get with Stormcast this season, I think, just like in the last season, basically, you need one priest to be able to translocate your pieces, to be able to strike somewhere and basically trade a priest instead of a valuable piece for an opponent's unit. So your unit goes in, it does damage, the opponent retaliates, but you're on finest hour quite likely, so you don't take any damage, more or less, and then with the priest you translocate in the enemy turn. This does mean that you spend a command point, whereas you only have 4 command points per battle round, so that is quite a hefty price to pay. Command points are not cheap, but then again, it's not bad to do this trade. There's worse things to spend your command points on, like an all-out attack, currently, I would say. So one priest you need. Then probably another priest for the utility prayers. So the one priest that you bring for translocate generally doesn't use any of the other prayers. So the utility priest, I would say, would be Eridan in this scenario. Eridan is a good scroll. It has a lot of utility within it. You can also take another priest to be able to blast weapons now and then. I don't know if another priest other than Eridan is really worth it. So basically this could say Eridan, but then you go into a list archetype where you always bring Eridan. So you need the one priest for translocate, you need probably Eridan. Then you need a wizard for unbinds mostly. So the Stormcast spells, the 18-inch range -1 charge die is really good. However, it does only decrease the chances of your opponents making a charge mid-game from generally automatically to like 2/3, because they can go to a place where they have to roll a 3 and then they make the charge. So then the spell basically means that the chances are just decreased, unless you want to play a game where you zone out your opponent and you just want to cripple one unit and then make it quite unlikely that they can charge. Then you have to deploy your wizard at 18 inches from that unit. There is some counterplay to it. It's a good spell. It's not the best spell in the game. Otherwise, the -1 to wound, I never cast it because my wizard is rarely in a situation where at the start of my turn he's within 12 inches of a unit on which it is impactful. -1 to wound is a funny spell because it sounds really good. Then again, big monsters, big damage units, they wound on 2+, so the damage output is only being diminished by like 20%, 20-25%, which is not that great. It's a decent debuff, but if you do it on a unit that wounds on 5s normally, then just half the damage output. That is great, but these are generally not the damage dealing units anyway. So that is quite a conditional spell that I find not that useful. D3 Mortals is nice, and yeah, D3 Mortals is just fine. Otherwise, we have the Manifestations. Manifestations do help Stormcast a bit, but not as much as some other factions. So the Forbidden Power, we already have mobility, so we don't need to bridge that much. Primal Energy just deals some damage, so you might as well spend your points on stuff that deals damage and that you don't have to set up. So And Morbid, you need casting bonuses basically to be able to routinely use it. So either you will bring Corondis or you bring a Knight Arcanum. Knight Arcanum does benefit a lot actually from the Dies Arcanum for the extra levels, so you get 2 unbind. So to me it seems basically like an automatic choice to just go for the Knight Arcanum with the Stormcast manifestations that are free instead of any of the others. Could go for the Storm Coven. Storm Coven is about twice as expensive as a Knight Arcanum, which, like a lot of people say that they're not too expensive, but if you compare it against the other option for a wizard, then they are quite expensive. And the only benefit they bring is that they have an extra spell on a 7, which is a 50-50 to go off. Your opponent can still unbind it, so it's less than 50% actually that you get it, and it gives you strike first, strike last. It's very nice, but I mean, it's also a bit situational whether it's important or not. So I do like the guaranteed strike first on reclusions in my turn, or in my opponent's turn, I mean. Having strike first in my turn, I think, is less impactful because I choose anyway where I want to go. And I generally go into one enemy unit that has decent damage output, and then I spread my other units around stuff that I think will not do as much damage to my Stormcast. So I don't really need to strike first. For the strike last, I have to be with the Storm Coven within 12 inches of the enemy, which rarely happens. There's people that counter cast with the Storm Coven. I would never do that because it's on a 8+ basically, and your opponent still has a decent chance to unbind as well. And it costs a command point, and command points are expensive. So what else do we need? We need some beefy combat units, and we need limited ranged options. So Stormcast could play very well into the ranged game. However, all the legend stuff has disappeared. The long strikes have gone up to 400 points for a reinforced unit, which is absolutely atrocious. So I can imagine that people don't like playing against long strike spam, and that is very valid. However, the damage output, the average damage output of long strikes for 400 points that you pay for them is below subpar. So really, really bad compared to combat units that we can field. So one argument for range damage is that you can use it every single turn. And then again, if you use mobile combat pieces, you can also use them every single turn. So you don't really need the range damage output. And actually in Age of Sigmar, combat units do activate twice a battle round, and if you're still in combat, I mean. And long strikes actually activate only once per combat round, per battle round. So damage output of long strikes is, in that sense, also effectively halved compared to the combat units if they are in combat. So with the obscuring being a thing, at the start of the GHB it wasn't clear that the places of power would also start being obscuring, but I believe they now start as obscuring as well. So it is very easy for your opponent to deploy with everything in obscuring terrain, except for the monsters because they don't benefit, but monsters are not really a Stormcast problem per se anyways. So there's no benefit to bringing long strikes anymore, I think, or other heavy ranged focus, because your opponent can still just go into terrain and make you ignore, or just ignore all the damage that you could do. So long strikes are out. For me, the Javelin Paladros are also out for this reason. And yeah, there's some people that are considering Tempestus now. I don't know. It's a mixed arms unit that can do a bit of both. It can probably take off some support units, but we also have some other more efficient units that can do the job in the same way. Mobility is still a thing. So this is still a game of stand on circles, even more so with this new GHB, I find. So mobility is great for that. So You have to be able to respond to your opponent, use Translocate with priests, use some teleports here and there, and still also have some units that are a bit mobile. So what does this bring all combined? I have been toying around with this list. One thing that I didn't mention in my overview is that the drop system has also changed. So before, in the previous General's Handbook, people tended to go for as few drops as possible to be able to dictate who would go first. Right now, that system is still in place. However, if you have more drops than your opponent, you get a single reroll once during the game to determine the initiative. And people have been calculating the effect of this, and they say like, well, it's about 75% chance that you can deny your opponent a double, which is great to calculate. However, what is not considered in the calculation is that you actually see the result of both of your rolls before you decide the reroll. So I think it's even stronger than that. So there is still some downsides to taking the double. So your opponent becomes the underdog. Raffle cycles can be scored suddenly. There's a Gyrannite treasure that gets removed. And it is generally discouraged to take the double in that way. So there's not that much incentives anyways. And then if you play the more drop game, then you can see that, I mean, for example, your opponent rolls a 2, you roll a 1. That's a very, very interesting situation to take the double, especially if with the higher drops your opponent has forced you to go first, because then on ties you also win the roll. So basically on 2+ you can deny the double. If your opponent rolls a 4, you can think about it. If your opponent rolls a 6, you probably won't take it. But there's still the option if you want to. So depending on the roll, that is, I think it's quite a strong situation where you can still try to deny the double. And Stormcast don't really deal well with double turns, because we go in, we try to bring the damage output of our opponent units low enough that we can survive the initial pushback in combat, and then we hope that we can survive the opponent's turn, and then we go again. It's really, if you get caught out on a double with Stormcast at the wrong moment, then your opponent has reached the threshold to go through part of your units and focus on the stuff that you don't want them to focus on. Like, we don't really bog down people as much as some other armies do. So that all being said, this is my current idea of a list. So I do tick the boxes. I do have Eridan as a priest. I have a Knight Relictor as a second priest. I have a wizard in the Knight Arcanum, and I have some mobility in the Paladors, the Prosecutors, and Eridan. And then I have some combat pieces in Lord Terminus with Reclusions and Gotrek, and another combat piece would be Eridan itself and the Prosecutors. So Eridan has a special prayer to boost Ruination units. Basically it means if you pick Eridan, Prosecutors become much more tempting, because the difference between Rend 1 and Rend 2 is actually massive. It's much more massive than people credit for, I think. So it's mostly influential against armored targets. So there's a cutoff point in Age of Sigmar, I find, between a 3-up and a 4-up armor save, where a 3-up armor save becomes generally quite invulnerable to damage, and a 4-up armor save doesn't, because people tend to not use all that defense on a 4-up armor save, which makes sense as well, because you're already taking the damage, so why bother? With a 3-up, people do tend to take all that defense. Also Stormcast, I think in every combat, if you still have a spare command point, you should all out defend with Stormcast. You shouldn't all out attack at all, generally, I think, but you should always all out defend. So if you all out defend with a 3-up save, you go to a 2-up save. prosecutors, if they have run 1, you go back to a 3 up. With run 2, you go to a 4 up save. So that is a 33% increase, well, 50% increase. So you go from 2 wounds to 3 wounds basically, and that scales really hard. You'd suddenly do way more damage, and then that is the most impactful situation, I would say. And then for the 4 up save, if your opponent does not all-out defend, you bring it to a 6 up, and then people are not going to be that happy. So that's good, really good interaction there. The prosecutors do perform way better if they get this buff, this specific buff, and otherwise they do give quite some mobility. So this is a package that you will routinely see in Stormcast right now, I think. And then otherwise, Lord Terminals and the Reclusions have never disappointed me in the previous handbook, and I think they got even better because of the no honor guard rules. And like at the start of the edition, there was the -1 attack that you could trigger even if you charged yourself. So Reclusions had to face Catacross with Mortis Guard, I think. That would charge in, survive the strike first, and then absolutely hammer down the Reclusions. Right now, this is looking way less appealing for Catacross, because you sit in the middle, you don't get a -1 attack. If your Lord Terminals dies, he gets up on a 3 up with the legendary tenacity, and you just go to town basically. So this is a good combination. Still solid, and I still have to encounter a unit that can deal with this. Mostly also because of the ruination roll that they have, which is also boosted by Eridan to give a reroll for that. So that is, this combination only got stronger in time, also with Eridan now. Then otherwise in the rest of the list we have some Vigilers, because I had some points left, the Stormstrike Paladors, because they are actually quite a solid unit. So for close to 200 points you get a unit that can move 12 inches, which is cheaper than the Vanguard equivalent. I could include the Vanguards as well instead of the other ones. Then again, the reason I play them is to have mobility, so I can score some stuff somewhere, to charge stuff on the board late game, which is where their reroll comes in handy, because probably either the Knight Arcanum, the Knight Relictor, or the unit themselves, or the Vigilers have died, so I do get strike first on the charge and a reroll for my charges, which is late game. It's sometimes more important than what the Vanguard stuff would do. So the Vanguard stuff, they can retreat and charge, but you would now play the Axe version. They're just like 50 points more expensive, which 50 points doesn't sound a lot, like, but it's like 20% more than these guys. So these are quite cheap, and I don't rely strongly on them, so I don't really need them to perform the best that they can in combat. So I'm okay to just tack stuff in combat and let them be. Then we have the Knight Arcanum, Knight Relictor, and then we have Gotrek. So we have to talk about Gotrek a little bit here. He has 340 points, I didn't include it here, but he has 340. That is a hefty price, because you have alternatives in Stormcast, like Quest of Soulsworn. I could include 2 units of Quest of Soulsworn, downgrade the Vigilers to either Griffhounds or Liberators, and then have way more bodies on the table. But Gotrek. So Places of Power, I think. Places of Power and other obscuring terrain. Obviously, obscure stuff within 1 inch of it. It's easier to get within 1 inch of it if you are just a single model, so it's easier to hide Gotrek than 2 units of Quest of Soulsworn, for example. In addition, Gotrek gets a -1 to be hit if he's close to either the Vigilers, Stormstrike Paladors, or Reclusions, or the Prosecutors, because of guarded hero, and so that already makes him quite difficult to target. And then the place of power, you can activate place of power at the start of the battle round to either become a wizard if you're not, for an unbind, which doesn't really make a difference. You can activate it to make something else obscuring, so more obscuring terrain for Gotrek. He's very happy about that. Or you can use it on a 3+ to heal for 2 wounds, and that is the big massive one. So Gotrek, he suffers a little bit from mobility issues. However, there's a lot of maps now with places of power everywhere. Like there's a single map where you have just a little line of places of power stretched out along the center of the map, and this is the map that Gotrek just loves. Because basically you can just walk around the field, not be seen, and heal 2/3 of the time 2 wounds every start of turn, which is massive on a profile with a 3 of ward save. It's because basically these wounds become 6 wounds if you consider the ward save as well. So, and that combined with the fact that he's just a single model, small model, there's not that many units that can bring a lot of models in contact with Gotrek being able to strike. Especially if you consider terrain, he is going to be hugging a place of power quite likely anyways. So the chances that there will be more than 6-7 models striking at Gotrek is quite low. And if you compare it to, if you combine it with the reclusions and maybe some other units to zone out some unit placements, then you can make sure that he can survive. And then he does survive, he heals for 2. He can still do all the usual unit stuff. He has 8 wounds, so he can power through on most units. And then he can power through back to a place of power if he went out of his way to kill something away from a place of power. So he's really focused, I think, to play close to places of power. But if you don't want to, you just send him in and he becomes his normal Gotrek unit without any buffs, so to say. And then the damage output of Gotrek. So you paid 340 points, which is a lot for just a single model. You could also bring, for example, a unit of reclusions or prosecutors. Reclusions do max damage of 38 for a full unit, and as they are taking wounds, that goes down, down to 0 eventually, you've got. Gotrek, for a single activation, 8 times 3 is 24 damage. So that is lower than the reclusions. However, you can spend the CP. CPs are expensive, I know. But you can spend the CP to make him fight twice, bringing his damage for a single turn to 48 max damage. On 2s and 2s, crit models, Rend 2 damage 3. So mostly Rend 2 is important, crit models is important, and 2s and 2s is just very reliable. So he does a lot of damage. If you are able to spend the CP, he does more damage than any other choice in the Stormcast arsenal for the price point that he is at. And Stormcast are not that command point demanding this edition, I find. As I said, don't really want to use all-out attack, don't really want to use covering fire because the important units can hide anywhere anyway, so the targets that your opponent will present you are going to be non-interesting. I don't really want to countercast because I don't have other than translocate, so that is once or twice per game. But I don't have a lore that really wants me to countercast. So what am I otherwise spending my CP on? Countercharge, redeploys, all-out defense, and that is mostly it. And to bring ones back a unit. So I do have the spare command points in this setup to play Gotrek, and he's just a beast. He's really just a beast. So yeah, that is my take on Stormcast for the new season. It might still change a bit over time. Just let me know, please, what you think of this lineup. whether you have tried anything similar or not. Is there anything that you took away from this video that I missed? Let me know, and I'll see you then next time. Hallo.
Hallo.